Hey, welcome back, everyone. As veterans and first responders, the transition process is going to test your adaptability. If you're someone who relies on brute force, or conversely, you're someone who prefers avoidance, either of which, simply because it's what you've always done, you're setting yourself up for one hell of an uphill battle. If you want to be honest with yourself, go back to the last time somebody called you out on something. Did they tell you that you're being way too overbearing? Or maybe you're micromanaging every single detail. On the flip side, did someone tell you that you're quiet? Maybe even too quiet. Like you're just hovering in the background, keeping your mouth shut and waiting for somebody else to make the decision. Now, regardless what you were told, your immediate reaction was probably to push back, even if it was internally. But you excused their comment by saying, "Hey, this is just who I am, and it works for me." And you might be right, at least in your own mind. But those personality traits didn't just happen by accident. You've built them over time. For you, they're like your armor. You're aggressive and prefer taking complete control. Or you lock your emotions down and are overly stoic. Those aren't flaws. They've likely been a tactical necessity. But whether you acknowledge it or not, transition is coming. And the things that allow you to perform in this job can turn into weird awkwardness when you move into the civilian world. But the goal isn't to change who you are. It's not about flipping a switch and becoming someone totally different. It's about recognizing that what feels like your greatest strength today can easily be perceived as your biggest weakness tomorrow if you don't learn how to adjust the volume for the environment. As a first responder, control isn't optional. It's how you do your job. But when it comes to buying or refinancing a home, most lenders don't get your world. Police Mortgage does. They specialize in working with first responders, walking you through the process, breaking down your options, and helping you lock in competitive rates without the runaround. Take control of your financial future with people who have your back. Visit policemortgage.com or call 312-499-8878. Police Mortgage, for first responders who are second to none. So let's check your ego at the door and get into what actually is happening. Because if you don't understand the mechanics of your behavior, you can't fix it. Think about how you operate while you're working, as well as probably your default when you're away from work. Now, granted, as a veteran or first responder, you're constantly exposed to high stress, unpredictable environments. So to survive and execute effectively, your brain builds what researchers call behavioral armor. If you're the person who's overbearing or you feel the need to step in and take control every time, to some degree, that armor was forged out of necessity. Because in a chaotic situation, taking control keeps the train on the tracks. It keeps people alive. But when you carry that same habit into a civilian environment or through the front door of your own home, how it gets received can be very different. What seems like protective control to you can be perceived by civilians as ego, insecurity, or a lack of trust in the team. They won't necessarily see it as someone taking charge. They might see it as someone who is aggressive and impossible to work with. Then there's the opposite end of the spectrum. Say you're the person who's emotionless, stays completely stoic, or never says anything in meetings or briefings. Your mentality is, hey, I'll just wait over here. In our worlds, emotional detachment can be a critical tool on your tool belt. It allows you to process significantly intense events without melting down in the moment. It can keep you functional. But when transition comes and you're sitting across from a civilian colleague or a hiring manager, that same detachment can make you seem robotic, disengaged, or completely uninvested. You might think you're being respectful and staying in your lane, but they can think that you have nothing to offer, that you won't be able to take charge when it's needed. So regardless if it's considered good or bad, we all have our ways of operating that we default to. In essence, our armor. And to some degree, it might be working for you. However, it might not be either. Because you do realize that maybe instead of saying anything to you, your coworkers have simply learned to work around you. Maybe they let you spin up and get angry, be on the verge of being out of control. They agree with you just to shut you up because they know they'll do it their way when you're out of sight. Or maybe because you're so hands-off and passive, they just disregard you or don't ask for your involvement. In essence, they make their own decisions and ask for your forgiveness later. But when you consider this concept of armor, it isn't necessarily something that makes us strong. It's something we put on to protect ourselves when we feel vulnerable or out of our element. And let's be honest. Stepping away from a world where you've learned the rules of this game and you're heading toward a world where you're going to be starting over at go, you're going to feel uncertain. And when we feel that uncertainty in a situation, we default to our armor. If you're naturally aggressive, you'll tend to get more aggressive. If you're naturally quieter, you'll generally tend to drift further back into the group and try to blend in more. And if you're the one who always needs to feel in control, you'll often micromanage even more. So then the question becomes, how do you remedy this? How do you take a behavioral trait that's your default, but might be working against you, and turn it into an asset for your future? First, you have to realize that it's not about changing your entire personality. You don't need to go from hard-nosed and decisive to someone who holds hands and sings Kumbaya. Ultimately, that type of change isn't natural, and it probably won't work anyway. Your goal isn't to destroy the armor. It's to learn how to adjust it. Imagine your personality traits as though they're channels on a sound mixing board. If your default setting is high-intensity assertiveness, you don't lower that channel completely. You remain a decisive person who can make hard calls under pressure, which civilian organizations actually need. But instead of running that fader at maximum all the time, you need to learn to dial it down to 30 or 40%. You maintain the authority, but you allow room for other people to have a voice. You shift from dictating every move to coordinating the team. That's how assertiveness stops being an overbearing weakness and turns into a high-level strategic leadership. Whereas, if your default setting is the quiet observer, you don't need to turn into a loudmouth who talks just to hear their own voice. You dial your engagement fader up from, say, 10% to 60%. You use that natural ability to sit back and observe the environment, but then you leverage it by speaking up at the right moment with precise and thoughtful input. Your goal is to move from being perceived as being passive to being the grounded voice of reason in the room. Next, you have to start doing your own internal review today. Pay attention to your emotional baseline over the next few weeks. Be mindful of those times when you do feel that urge to take over a situation that doesn't actually require your control. Or what goes on in your head before you shut down and check out of a conversation. Then, when you start recognizing those triggers, you gain the power to pause. And that pause is where your future success lies. Because in that brief moment, you get to decide, am I reacting out of habit and my armor? Or am I choosing the right level of engagement for this moment? It's about tactical calibration. If you can master the ability to read the room, identify your default reactions, and consciously adjust your volume, you become dangerous in the best way possible. But before we go any further, as a reminder, if you want more on this topic as well as additional transition planning and preparation, I put out a weekly newsletter. So go check out the link in the show notes to sign up, and you'll get more beneficial information beyond this episode. All right, now that we've identified the issue, let's address why this ability to adjust your volume isn't optional and what happens if you ignore it. As veterans and first responders, there's a blind spot that usually catches us off guard during transition. While we're in these careers, the mission and the objective holds everything together. That structure is built into the system. And in these environments, your team puts up with your behavioral traits. In many instances, because they have to. If you're overbearing, if you're a micromanager, or you're hyper aggressive, yeah, people might complain behind your back, but they still follow the orders because the mission demands that execution. However, if you're quiet, generally detached, or emotionally robotic, the system will push you along because your technical skills fulfill the job requirement. But when you step out of the uniform, the safety net disappears. In the civilian world, nobody is obligated to tolerate erratic, overbearing behavior. There's no defined structure keeping people in line. Influence is not given to you by your seniority or rank. It has to be earned through trust, communication, and most importantly, emotional intelligence. So if you move into a civilian organization or attempt to build your own business, but your assertiveness keeps running at 100%, few are going to see you as an elite leader who's just taking charge. Rather, they'll likely label you as toxic, or you'll be viewed as a liability. People won't necessarily fall in line. They'll simply quit, or they'll report you to HR until you're pushed out. However, if you step into those same environments, operating in detachment mode, being totally quiet and hiding behind the "I'll just wait over here until someone tells me what to do" mentality, you'll most certainly become invisible. Civilians won't look at your silent presence and assume that you're a stoic professional waiting for orders. They're more than likely going to assume that you lack initiative, you don't have any original thoughts, or you don't care about the organization's success. Yes, you probably won't get fired, but you'll ultimately be left behind. Which is why this is where your psychological change has to happen. You have to realize that relying on your default armor without calibrating it will likely be your operational failure. And I get it. It's easy for us to sit back and say, well, civilians are just soft. They don't understand how we operate. But that's just making excuses. That's your ego trying to protect you from the uncomfortable reality that you're unable to adapt. Because blaming the civilian environment for you not understanding your operational habits is like going into a foreign country, but continuing to speak English, maybe just a little louder, maybe a little slower, and then still getting angry when they don't understand you. Remember, you're the one who's moving into their territory. It's on you to learn the terrain and adapt your communication and performance. In essence, it comes down to being able to be vulnerable. And before you get all defensive and throw your arms up, I don't mean being vulnerable as in being weak, but vulnerable as in the willingness to face risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. When you transition, you'll be stepping into a high level of uncertainty. And the highest level of courage and discipline that you can demonstrate isn't doubling down on your old habits. It's having the self-awareness to acknowledge that your default settings might work for the mission today, but will have a high probability of sabotaging your mission tomorrow. Think about what's truly at risk here. It isn't just getting a job or fitting into a corporate system and culture. It's your long-term success, your financial security, your mental health, and your family's stability. As veterans and first responders, we don't tend to struggle after leaving service because we lack hard skills or a strong work ethic. We struggle because the friction created by our uncalibrated armor often isolates us. We can feel misunderstood. We'll likely get frustrated. We'll usually see the civilian world as broken, and we often pull back into our shell. Or more often, we just simply detonate our opportunities. Calibration is not surrender, and adjusting your volume is not changing who you are. But if you want to win in your next environment, you have to master this level of internal awareness today. When you look forward to that first cup of coffee, as soon as that morning alarm goes off, then Blue Line Roasting is the choice for you. They're a Tennessee-based law enforcement-owned company. They're roasting small batches of premium coffee, fresh, within 48 hours of your ordering, and ship fast so it doesn't sit around getting stale. From Patriot, their light roast, to Failure Drill, their dark roast. They've got something that fits whatever you prefer. Whole bean or ground, it's your call. But Blue Line Roasting is more than just good coffee. A portion of every purchase goes to support law enforcement families who are dealing with line of duty injury or loss. So your morning routine becomes something bigger. Great coffee and real impact. Grab a single bag, try a sampler, or set up a subscription so you're never caught without it. Shipping is always free. And for the listeners of this podcast, use the promo code TRANSITION10 to get 10% off your order. Head on over to bluelineroasting.com and make your morning count. I want you to think back to the first day you put the uniform on. You didn't show up polished and squared away. You didn't walk through the door with all the instincts, the tactical skills, or the composure you have right now. You had to learn it. You had to let go of old civilian habits. Put your ego in check and allow yourself to be shaped by the demands of these careers. You did it because you were willing to be uncomfortable. Now, as you look toward the end of this ride and the start of whatever comes next, that same willingness is what's required of you again. The equipment you've been assigned isn't what's made you formidable. In the end, they're just tools. Every one of us could be handed a sniper rifle. That doesn't mean that every one of us would become proficient with it. The real asset has always been your capacity to adapt and to execute under pressure. Conversely, adjusting your volume is not losing who you are. It's just the next level of tactical discipline. It's recognizing that the environment will change and the professional in the room changes with it. You have to be willing to examine your natural personality defaults. Identify the armor that you've been wearing to protect yourself, and make the conscious decision of how you're going to dial it in right now, well before you step into civilian life. I appreciate you staying until the end. Staying all the way through helps the engagement ratings, so thank you. As always, send me your comments. Please be honest with me. Tell me what you like. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. I can't imagine that's not hard to do. I can't make any changes unless you tell me what you need. Also, please share the podcast with anyone who you think would benefit from it and enjoy it. And if you're not already, please follow the podcast wherever you're getting this episode. Stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one.